The interstellar transport vessel, Zenith's Pride, hummed quietly through the void between star systems, carrying its precious cargo of exchange students from 12 different worlds. Captain Vextar of the Catherian Collective adjusted his 4 primary eyes as he reviewed the passenger manifest for the 100th time that cycle. Most entries were standard, young beings from civilized worlds seeking education at the prestigious Galactic University of Sciences on Kepler 442b. Then his gaze fell upon the entry that had been giving him digestive troubles since departure. Human. Terra Sol 3. Classification. Death World. Warning. Biohazard protocols in effect. Humans were new to the galactic community. First contact had occurred only 2 standard years ago, and the initial reports were concerning. Their home world was classified as a Class Thouthi Death World, a rating so extreme that most species considered it uninhabitable. The gravity alone would crush a Catherian, and the atmospheric pressure could rupture a Zalani's breathing sacs. Yet somehow, impossibly, an entire civilization had evolved there. And now, one of them was aboard his ship. Vexitar's tentacles writhed nervously as he made his way to the observation deck. The human had requested to spend most of the journey there, claiming it helped with something called cabin fever. The captain found this puzzling. Fever was an illness, and the cabin's environmental systems were functioning perfectly. As the blast doors whispered open, Vextar immediately spotted the human. Jake Morrison sat cross-legged on the deck, staring out at the star field with an expression the captain couldn't decipher. The young human appeared deceptively fragile, bipedal with only 2 arms, 2 eyes, and skin so thin that Vextar could see the blue lines of its circulatory system beneath. "G'day, Captain," Jake said without turning around, somehow having detected the Catherian's approach despite facing away. Another unsettling human trait. Their sensory awareness seemed far beyond what their simple anatomy suggested. "Human Morrison," Vextar replied, proud of his pronunciation. "I trust your journey remains tolerable?" Jake chuckled, a sound that made Vextar's gill slits flutter involuntarily. Human laughter was another mystery, a vocalization that could apparently express humor, nervousness, or even aggression depending on context. "Yeah, not bad. Bit cramped, though. Back home, I'd usually be out camping or surfing by now. This is the longest I've been away from open air." Jake finally turned, and Vextar fought the urge to step back. Those predator eyes, forward-facing, designed for tracking prey, fixed on him with uncomfortable intensity. "Surfing?" Vextar inquired, genuinely curious despite his unease. "Standing on a board, riding waves, the bigger and more dangerous, the better. Last month before I left, I was out at Pipeline, 20-foot barrels, absolutely pumping." Jake's eyes seemed to gleam with what Vexitar was learning to recognize as human enthusiasm. "Course, that was after the shark incident." Every translator in the vicinity seemed to hiccup at once. "Shark incident?" "Tiger shark, about 12 feet. Pretty standard size, really. Was out at dawn. Just me and a couple of mates, when this beauty decided to check us out. Came right up under my board." Jake mimed the encounter with his hands. "So naturally, I punched it in the snout." Vextar's translator was now making concerning whirring sounds. "You struck a predatory marine creature?" "Well, yeah. They don't like that much. Usually back off after a good bop on the nose. This one was a bit persistent, though, so I had to grab its tail and redirect it away from my mate Sarah. She was having trouble with her leash." The captain's 4 hearts were now beating in completely different rhythms. According to the Galactic database, Terran sharks were apex predators with bone-crushing jaws and electro-receptive hunting abilities. The idea of deliberately making physical contact with one was beyond comprehension. "This is normal human behavior?" Vextar managed. "For Australians, pretty much. We grow up with drop bears, box jellies, redback spiders, saltwater crocs, blue-ringed octopi, funnel webs, taipans, stonefish, cassowaries. Jake was counting on his fingers now. Oh, and magpies during swooping season. That's probably the worst one, actually. Each item on the list caused Vextar's translator to emit increasingly distressed beeps as it accessed the Terran biological database. Every single creature mentioned was classified as extremely dangerous to most known life forms. You coexist with these creatures? Vextar's voice had risen to a pitch that his crew would later describe as slightly hysterical. Mate, Australia is these creatures. We just live there too. You learn to adapt pretty quick. Like, when I was 5, Dad taught me how to check my shoes for redbacks and under the toilet seat for spiders. Mum showed me how to back away slowly from a cassowary. Standard childhood stuff. Vextar was beginning to understand why the Galactic Council had classified humans as a potentially catastrophic threat to station security. This wasn't malice or aggression. This was a species that considered mortal danger to be childhood stuff. And you voluntarily chose to pursue education away from your homeworld? The captain asked, morbid curiosity overriding his better judgment. Jake shrugged, another mystifying human gesture. Yeah, wanted to see what else was out there. Earth's great and all, but it's a bit safe, you know? Same old predators, same old natural disasters, same old life-threatening situations. I'm hoping university might offer some new challenges. The blood in Vexitar's veins turned to ice. This human found Earth, a world where the very air was toxic to most species, where megafauna actively hunted sentience, where the weather could kill in dozens of creative ways. Safe. A soft chime indicated they were approaching the first checkpoint station. Vextar excused himself and hurried to the bridge, his mind reeling. What kind of educational institution could possibly provide adequate challenges for a being that considered a class-themed death world mundane? As he settled into his command chair, Vextar noticed his communications officer's distress signals were flashing. "Sir," the young Altarian squeaked, "we're receiving priority warnings from Checkpoint Station Gamma 7. They're requesting immediate biosecurity protocols for the human passenger." "What kind of protocols?" Vexitar asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Full hazmat containment, sir. Apparently the station commander has reviewed the human's medical files. According to their records, the human carries 17 different bacterial colonies that could prove lethal to most station personnel, has an immune system rated as aggressively overactive, and—" The officer paused, mandibles clicking nervously. "And their stomach acid is classified as a Class 4 corrosive." Vextar slumped in his chair. The human wasn't just dangerous because of where it came from or what it had survived. The human was dangerous, right down to its cellular level. Every system in its body was designed to survive in conditions that would annihilate most galactic species. And somehow this walking biological weapon was just a university student who missed surfing. The captain began to suspect that accepting humans into the galactic community might have been a catastrophic error in judgment. But as he watched Jake through the security monitors, calmly reading what appeared to be a recreational text about something called extreme mountaineering, Vextar realized it was far too late for such concerns. The human was already here, and tomorrow they would reach the university station, where thousands of young beings from across the galaxy were waiting to meet their new classmate. Vextar reached for his emergency medication and began composing what he suspected would be the first of many incident reports. The Galactic University of Sciences sprawled across the entire northern hemisphere of Kepler 442b, its crystalline spires reaching into the lavender sky. For 3 centuries, it had been the premier institution of higher learning in the known galaxy, attracting the brightest minds from hundreds of worlds. The university prided itself on its safe, controlled environment where delicate beings could pursue knowledge without the barbaric concerns of survival. That reputation was about to be severely tested. Dean Morden of the Biological Sciences Department had been having recurring nightmares since receiving Jake Morrison's application. The Threxy administrator's usual purple hue had faded to an alarming shade of gray as she reviewed the human's academic records for the dozenth time. The creature had somehow completed secondary education on a world where the local wildlife could dissolve bone marrow, and it had done so while participating in recreational activities that the university's risk assessment AI had classified as mathematically suicidal. "The transport will dock in 3 standard hours," her assistant, Kel, informed her through a translation matrix that kept glitching whenever it tried to process human terminology. "Security has established a perimeter around Docking Bay 7, and the medical team is standing by with full contamination protocols." "What about the other students?" Morden asked, her 3-chambered heart fluttering anxiously. "We've implemented the emergency notification system. All first-year students have been briefed on proper Deathworlder interaction protocols. Maintain minimum 50-meter distance, avoid sudden movements, never make direct eye contact, and immediately report any aggressive displays to security." Morden's tentacles twisted into knots. The aggressive displays list had been compiled based on observed human behavior in the Galactic database. It included showing teeth, raising voice volume, rapid gesticulation, competitive sports, and something called banter that appeared to be ritualized verbal combat. Meanwhile, in the first-year dormitory complex, word of the incoming human had spread like plasma fire through the student body. The common area buzzed with nervous excitement and barely contained terror. Zixara, a young luminary whose crystalline form naturally glowed with bioluminescence, dimmed to almost nothing as she whispered to her roommate, "I heard they can dislocate their own joints at will and continue functioning." "That's nothing," chittered Queep, a insectoid hive mind representative. "The data files say they can survive without food for weeks and actually become more dangerous when threatened. Something called adrenaline transforms them into unstoppable killing machines." A Geltharian student named Blubber, whose gelatinous form was currently oscillating between colors that indicated extreme anxiety, bubbled, "My podmate's cousin works in xenobiology. They say humans don't even have proper environmental controls. They just adapt. Their bodies literally change to survive whatever's trying to kill them." The rumors grew more outlandish with each retelling. By the time the transport docked, half the student body was convinced that humans could phase through solid matter, while the other half believed they reproduced by combat. None of them were prepared for the reality. Jake Morrison stepped off the transport wearing what he considered his good clothes: clean jeans, a rugby jersey with only one small hole, and boots that had seen him through 2 years of university back home. He carried a single duffel bag and wore an expression of mild interest as he looked around the docking bay. The 43 heavily armed security personnel positioned around the bay were not what he'd expected as a welcoming committee. "G'day," Jake called out cheerfully, raising one hand in a gesture that caused 3 guards to immediately power up their stun weapons. "I'm Jake Morrison, here for the exchange program. This the right place?" Dean Morden approached cautiously, staying well within the recommended safe distance. "Human Morrison," she said, her translator struggling with the concept of casual greeting. "Welcome to the Galactic University of Sciences. I am Dean Morden. We have prepared special accommodations for your unique requirements." Jake looked puzzled as he followed the dean through corridors that had been mysteriously cleared of all other students. "Special accommodations? That's really not necessary. I'm pretty easygoing. Just need somewhere to sleep and maybe directions to the cafeteria. I could eat a horse right about now." The translator immediately began smoking. Several guards went into defensive positions. The phrase, "could eat a horse," had been flagged as potentially indicating cannibalistic tendencies, combined with consumption of creatures roughly the size of a small transport. The cafeteria? Mordoon managed, her voice reaching frequencies that shattered two nearby crystal formations. Yeah, you know food? I've been living on those nutrient paste packets for 3 days. They're not bad, but they're not exactly a meat pie either. Jake patted his stomach, a gesture that caused the entire security detail to take a collective step backward. What followed was perhaps the most terrifying 10 minutes in the university's history. Jake was escorted to the student cafeteria, which had been hastily evacuated except for the bravest nutritionist in 3 sectors, a Violish named Dr. Temrin. The poor creature had volunteered to oversee the humans' first meal, armed with nothing but a comprehensive list of foods that were theoretically non-toxic to human biology. "We have prepared a selection of nutritionally appropriate substances," Dr. Temrin announced, gesturing to a table loaded with carefully synthesized proteins and vitamin compounds. "Each has been certified safe for human consumption according to Terran biochemical analysis." Jake looked at the spread of beige, odorless cubes and clear liquids with the expression of someone who had just been offered cardboard soup. "Right, that's very thoughtful. But do you maybe have anything with a bit more flavor? Some spice, perhaps? Maybe something that didn't come out of a synthesizer?" "Spice?" Dr. Temrin's translator hiccuped. "You wish to consume irritants?" "Well, yeah. Food without spice is just sad. Back home, I put chili on everything. The hotter, the better. There's this place in Melbourne that does a ghost pepper challenge. If you can finish their burger without crying, you get your photo on the wall." Every being within earshot immediately accessed the Galactic database. Ghost Pepper returned results that required 3 separate warnings about information that could cause psychological trauma. Capsaicin levels that could incapacitate a Catherian were apparently considered recreational by humans. But Jake wasn't finished. "Course, the real test is Mum's cooking. She makes this curry that could strip paint. Dad says it's what prepared him for dealing with chemical weapons in the military." Good times. The silence that followed was so complete that the station's atmospheric recyclers could be heard humming. Dr. Temrin had gone completely transparent. A Vailish stress response usually reserved for imminent death situations. "Your parental figure regularly exposed you to chemical weapons as a form of nourishment?" Mordoon asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well, no. She called it Sunday dinner. But yeah, pretty much the same thing." "Oh, and before I forget," Jake reached into his bag, causing every weapon in the room to swivel toward him. "I brought some Tim Tams to share. Thought you might like to try some Earth food?" He pulled out a small package of chocolate-covered biscuits. According to the scanners, they contained sugar levels that would induce hyperactivity in most species, caffeine that could stimulate a Zalani into cardiac arrest, and chocolate, which was flagged as a mild toxin for 60% of known galactic life forms. "These are recreational narcotics?" someone squeaked. "Nah, mate, just biscuits, though I suppose they are a bit addictive. My sister can go through a packet in 10 minutes when she's stressed." Jake opened the package and popped one in his mouth, chewing contentedly while surrounded by beings who were convinced they were witnessing someone casually consume poison. As Jake settled into his accommodations that evening, a specially constructed isolation unit that the university normally used for containing volatile experiments, he remained completely unaware that his mere presence had triggered a campus-wide emergency protocol. Students were attending lectures via remote feed. Professors were updating their wills, and the medical center had preemptively prepared for casualties. Jake, meanwhile, was having the time of his life. The isolation unit had excellent Wi-Fi, the environmental controls were more responsive than his dorm back home, and he'd managed to convince the extremely nervous food delivery robot to bring him something with at least a hint of actual flavor. As he drifted off to sleep, Jake smiled contentedly. University life was going to be brilliant. He couldn't wait to meet his classmates and see what kind of challenges the curriculum would offer. Outside his door, a continuous rotation of guards maintained their vigil, armed with enough firepower to level a small moon, all trained on one cheerful Australian who just wanted to make friends and get a decent education. The worst part, from the administration's perspective, was that classes hadn't even started yet. 3 weeks into the semester, the Galactic University of Sciences was experiencing what administrators were diplomatically calling an unprecedented period of cultural exchange. What they meant was that Jake Morrison had somehow become the most simultaneously feared and beloved student in the institution's 3-century history. It had started during his first comparative xenobiology lecture. Professor Veltar, a distinguished Altarian scholar with 40 years of teaching experience, had been demonstrating the defensive mechanisms of various galactic species when Jake politely raised his hand. "Yes, Human Morrison," Veltar had said, his voice betraying only the slightest tremor. "Sorry, Professor, but I think there might be an error in your data about Rigelian spine wasps." The lecture hall, already tense with the presence of a Death Worlder, went completely silent. Rigelian spine wasps were classified as one of the most dangerous creatures in known space, meter-long insects with neurotoxic stingers and aggressive territorial behavior. "An error?" Veltar managed. "Yeah, you mentioned they're impossible to approach safely, but that's not quite right. You just need to understand their behavioral patterns. They're actually quite predictable once you know what triggers their aggression response." Every student in the amphitheater was now staring at Jake with expressions ranging from awe to abject terror. "And you know this." "How?" Veltar asked, though he suspected he didn't want to hear the answer. "Oh, I did a paper on them for my entomology class back home. Had to observe them in their natural habitat for 2 weeks. Lovely creatures, really. Bit like our huntsman spiders, but with more personality." The sound that emerged from the lecture hall could only be described as 200 beings simultaneously having existential crises. "You observed them in their natural habitat?" Veltar's mandibles were clicking so rapidly they sounded like maracas. "Yeah, had to build a hide about 50 meters from their main nest. The trick is not to make any sudden movements during their patrol cycles, and whatever you do, don't wear anything yellow. Drives them absolutely mental." Jake pulled out his tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be hundreds of close-up photographs of creatures that could liquefy a Threxy in seconds. "Got some brilliant shots, though. Want to see?" What followed was perhaps the most surreal academic presentation in university history. Jake Morrison, sitting casually in his chair while beings 3 times his size cowered behind desks, gave an impromptu lecture on the mating habits, territorial behaviors, and optimal observation techniques for creatures that the galactic community considered barely contained nightmares. "The really interesting bit," Jake continued, completely oblivious to the fact that half his classmates had fainted, "is their problem-solving intelligence. I watched one group work together to dismantle an automated research probe that was bothering them. Took them about 6 hours, but they figured out how to remove each component without triggering the self-destruct." "Clever little guys." Professor Veltar made a mental note to completely revise the xenobiology curriculum. If a human undergraduate could spend 2 weeks casually observing creatures that required military-grade containment protocols, what did that say about the rest of the course material? The academic disruption was just the beginning. Jake's presence in the dormitories had created an entirely new social dynamic. Initially, students had maintained the recommended safe distances and communicated only through intermediaries, But curiosity, as it always does, eventually overcame fear. It started with Pip, a young Felnari, whose natural camouflage abilities made them one of the braver students. Pip had been watching Jake through the common room's observation ports, fascinated by the human's strange habits. "Human Morrison," Pip had eventually ventured, their voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing?" Jake looked up from where he was sitting on the floor, manipulating what appeared to be a complex three-dimensional puzzle. "Oh, hey, Pip, just working on a Rubik's Cube. Helps me think. Want to have a go?" Pip approached cautiously. The Rubik's Cube appeared to be a harmless geometric object, but given Jake's history, it could easily be some form of Deathworld training device. "It's safe?" Pip asked. Jake laughed, that terrifying human sound that could apparently mean anything from joy to impending violence. "Safe as houses, mate. Well, safer than my house anyway. We've got redbacks in the shed." Pip's translator gave up entirely at that point, but the Felnari's natural curiosity overcame their programming. They took the cube with trembling appendages and began to experiment with its mechanisms. Within an hour, half the dormitory was clustered around Jake, watching in fascination as he demonstrated various human recreational activities. None of them could understand why anyone would voluntarily engage in mental challenges for fun, but there was something oddly compelling about Jake's enthusiasm. "Back home," Jake explained while teaching a group of students a card game called Go Fish, "we've got this saying, fair dinkum, means something's genuine, honest, the real deal. You lot are pretty fair dinkum." The translator had been updated with Australian colloquialisms after the third day of complete communication breakdown, but the meaning was clear enough. Jake Morrison, the walking weapon from humanity's death world, was telling them they were his friends. It was Zix Ara who first worked up the courage to ask the question that had been haunting everyone since Jake's arrival. "Human Jake," the Luminari said, her crystalline form pulsing nervously. Are you trying not to kill us?" Jake looked genuinely confused. "Kill you? Why would I want to kill you? You're all brilliant. This is the most interesting place I've ever been." "But you're from a death world," Queep chittered. "Your species evolved to be predators. Everything about your biology suggests aggression and violence." Jake considered this for a moment, absently shuffling cards with a dexterity that several students found mildly hypnotic. "Well, yeah, I suppose we did evolve as persistence hunters, and Australia's pretty rough. But that doesn't mean we go around picking fights with everyone we meet." He dealt out cards as he spoke, the simple action somehow managing to be both casual and vaguely threatening given his reputation. "See, the thing about coming from a dangerous place is that you learn to pick your battles. Everything in Australia can kill you, so you develop a pretty good sense of what's actually worth fighting and what's just posturing. Most of the time, the dangerous stuff leaves you alone if you leave it alone." Blubber, the Geltharian, oscillated to a color that indicated deep thought. "So you are not constantly in a state of combat readiness?" "Nah, that'd be exhausting. Though I suppose, compared to you lot, I might seem a bit intense. Your worlds sound lovely, by the way. Peaceful. Must be nice not having to worry about whether that log in the creek is actually a crocodile." "Crocodiles?" someone squeaked. "Big reptilian predators. Ambush hunters. They can stay underwater for hours and launch themselves out like a missile when something comes to drink. Brilliant design, really. We've got saltwater crocs up north that can take down a buffalo." The room had gone quiet again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was a kind of awed fascination. Jake wasn't boasting or trying to intimidate. He was just talking about home, the way any student might discuss their family or childhood pets. "The thing is," Jake continued, "living somewhere dangerous makes you appreciate the good stuff more, like this." He gestured around the common room. "Safe, comfortable, surrounded by interesting people from all over the galaxy. This is brilliant. Why would I want to ruin it by being aggressive? That was the moment everything changed. Jake Morrison wasn't a barely contained weapon waiting to explode. He was just a guy from a tough neighborhood who was genuinely excited to be at university. By the end of the month, Jake had been invited to join 3 different study groups, had revolutionized the university's emergency response protocols. His casual suggestions for improvement had exposed dozens of critical flaws, and had somehow become the unofficial counselor for homesick students. "You miss your family?" Jake would say to a crying first year. "Course you do. That's normal. Tell you what, let's find something here that reminds you of home." His reputation as a death worlder made him an oddly comforting presence. If Jake Morrison, who had grown up dodging venomous spiders and wrestling sharks, thought their problems were normal and manageable, then maybe they really were. The transformation was complete when Jake volunteered for the inter-university athletics competition. The suggestion had caused a brief panic in the administration offices. The image of a human competing against other species in physical contests conjured visions of interstellar incidents and diplomatic crises. But Jake had simply wanted to try the local version of rugby. "Looks like fun," he'd said, watching a practice session between the Kitherian and Zalani teams. "Mind if I join in?" What followed was the most lopsided athletics match in galactic history. Not because Jake dominated, though his endurance and coordination were certainly impressive, but because he spent the entire game encouraging his opponents. "Good tackle, mate," he'd call out after being brought down by 3 Kitherians. "Nearly had me there." When a young Zalani player was clearly struggling with fatigue, Jake jogged over during a break. "You right? Need some water? This heat's a killer, isn't it?" By the final whistle, both teams were clustered around Jake, asking questions about Earth sports, human training methods, and whether he could teach them that move where he'd somehow twisted out of what should have been an impossible tackle. Dean Mordun watched from the sidelines, her purple hue slowly returning to its normal shade for the first time since Jake's arrival. The human wasn't a threat to be contained. He was exactly what he appeared to be. A student who wanted to learn, make friends, and maybe have a bit of fun along the way. The fact that he could probably survive being dropped into an active volcano was just an interesting quirk of his biology. As the semester continued, Jake Morrison became something of a legend at the Galactic University of Sciences. Not as the terrifying death worlder they'd all feared, but as the guy who could fix any problem, had a story for every situation, and somehow made everyone around him feel like they were capable of handling whatever challenges life threw at them. After all, if Jake could grow up dodging drop bears and swimming with sharks, their upcoming exams probably weren't that big a deal. The university's reputation for safety and controlled learning environments remained intact. It had just expanded to include the understanding that sometimes the most dangerous places produce the most helpful people. And Jake Morrison, sitting in his room late one evening writing emails to his family back home, smiled as he typed, "Dear Mom and Dad, uni's going brilliantly. Made heaps of friends, learning loads, and nobody's tried to eat me yet. Australia's prepared me well for everything except how nice everyone is here. Miss you both. Give my love to the huntsman in the bathroom, Jake." Outside his door, there were no longer any guards. Just a small sign that read, "Jake Morrison, Resident Advisor, Crisis Counselor, and Honorary Friend to All." The alien students had encountered Jake Morrison, the Australian death worlder, and moments later discovered that sometimes the most fearsome reputation hides the biggest heart.